My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is June 17, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Julia Yezbick. Is that the correct way to pronounce it, Julia?
Yes. Yeah. It's phonetic. Like it looks, it's pronounced like it looks. But it confuses
Thank
lots
you.
of people.
Thank you so much for your time. Where are you calling in from?
I'm in Detroit.
How cool is that? I was born in Flint, Michigan. So,
All right.
um, the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
Hmm. Love.
Oh, I love that answer. I get that often.
I bet
What's
you
what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
do. Ooh, that's a tough call. I immediately was about to say, visuals or imagery, but I think sound actually really, if it's not like, listening to someone give a talk, but if it's sound, I find it incredibly impactful and effective. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting because the neuroscientists say that, sight is the most impactful sense, but indeed all 5 of them are impactful, we
Mhm.
wanna think,
Mhm.
and, it's an ongoing thing of integrating them. So why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, I think it probably evolved as a safety issue, and then continued as curiosity. I think we're pretty innately curious beings. Um, yeah.
Well, you pretty much anticipated the next question. You must have ESP. Is this need is this need or want to collect information to gather it more innate or more invented?
No, I think it's definitely innate. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I think it probably was evolutionarily beneficial to know about your environment and the world around you so that you don't get eaten.
yep.
Right? Yeah.
Do thoughts create emotions?
Mm. Hmm. Now you're getting into some. I mean, the linearity of that, I think, is not so. It's not, I don't think it's a causal relationship necessarily.
Yeah,
Emotions probably create thoughts if we must
yeah,
go the chicken and the egg route.
yeah.
But I think in reality that they probably coalesce in much more kind of amorphous forms and things like that.
Yeah, it is like, you know, it's there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions. It's just like jumping off points. But
Mm,
what I like is you already get a sense. It's more like we're having fun and it's your hunch. It's
yeah,
not that I'm trying to hold you to some sort of and are
yeah,
laying it down like what you believe. Like
yeah.
my mother, when I said, "Can I interview you?" And she says, "Well, everything I say today, it might be different tomorrow." I says, "Well, that's all right."
Yeah, I agree with that. I like your mother.
Yeah,
My hunch today is,
yeah, yeah.
my hunch today is that I think we don't give our emotions enough credit, actually. That that there's really not logic without emotion, I think. And we
Would
need to give them more of their due. And
Beautiful.
yeah, like take
Yeah,
them seriously in a way, but not too seriously, obviously. But like,
yeah,
but I think that, yeah, I think emotion is a big part of it, a big part of everything,
yeah,
because we could talk about also like, what is logic based on, and
yeah,
reasoning, and what is a fact, and all of those things. But really, I mean, all of it at the end of the day, I think comes down to our emotional responses to perceptions, and
yeah.
perception is very complex. Yeah.
Boy, you anticipate a whole lot of questions there. Your
Just setting you up.
your that's good. Well, your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling? Again, I know it's both and it
Yeah.
depends, but just your
I think feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think people like to think that they're thinkers, and some people definitely more than others. But again, I think we don't give our emotions enough credit for how much they rule our brain too.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
I've tried it.
Tried it. Good. I don't get that answer very often. See, I got it from McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. And Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
Oh,
But try it is sort of like based more on
doing.
experiential
Yeah, absolutely.
doing, action. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Can hum can humans think without language?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, Chomsky says that a language is not just words. It's culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is.
Hmm.
What do you do when language doesn't work, when language breaks down?
Language breaks down all the time for me. I mean, that's why I'm an artist, right? I mean, I have to turn to filmmaking, to poetry, to making sounds with my body, like singing. I'm not a singer, but it doesn't matter. Like
Yeah.
when I don't have the words, it just has to come out another way. I mean, I was actually at a performance that a friend was doing about a month ago, and I found myself just crying. Like it was like the only way that I could respond to what I was perceiving of their
Yeah.
incredible performance. And there wasn't any words I could put to it, just tears running down my face. Just that was words failed me, and that's the other way that it came out. It's just in
Yeah.
tears.
No, that was beautiful. 2 things, one is if you can't say it, sing it. If you can't sing it, dance it.
Mm-hmm.
It we could add another if you can't dance it, cry it.
Yeah.
Again, my mother taught me that, crying, you should allow yourself to cry, but some people think, well, that's an emotional breakdown, you're sad or something. She goes, not necessarily, because besides it being emotional, it's physical and it's getting toxins out of your body. It's
Yeah.
a way we get these things out. We don't realize there's toxins. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
2 questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Hmm. Um, I don't think so. um, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I guess thinking. I'm getting stuck on the word thinking. It's funny. I'm getting stuck more on the word thinking than on the word soul.
That's good. Everybody I just added this question about a half a year ago, and everybody goes to the soul part.
Huh.
S That was good. You did that. Yeah.
Well, I think, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think we definitely have a kind of, I'm not a religious person, but I think that there are other forms of our beings. Um, but whether or not they think in the way that we think of thinking, you know, I think that they express probably in some, I guess the question is sort of like, what is thinking?
Yeah.
Uh, Yeah.
It's also you're saying other forms of us. Would
Mm.
you say that could be described as non-physical?
Oh,
You
yeah.
Yeah, non-physical, there's other forms, and
Mhm.
that's what some people say the soul. Well, the other Turing question is, can machines think?
Mm. Hmm. Again, I think it kind of, yeah, it depends on how we think about what thinking is. If thinking is just, even if we think of it as reasoning, I mean,
Yeah,
machines and algorithms can weigh lots of different factors and make a quote unquote decision. But again, I mean, to me, I think that what's missing in that is the emotion, and I don't think that thought and reason are as able to be extracted from emotion as we might think they are. I think that
yeah,
they're very linked, and so that's where I think you could say a machine can calculate,
yeah.
uh, but it can't have emotion, um, as far as we know so far.
Yeah.
I know that there's much debate about this, and the folks
Yeah.
over at the MIT Media Lab are working diligently on their robotics team, you know. Um, but yeah, I think that emotion is really complex and really beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, and I think what's partly so beautiful about it is its expansiveness and um, it's never even just necessarily one thing. You know, it's multiplicity. It has an inherent multiplicity. Um, you know, I have little kids, and so like I talk with them all the time. Like, oh, tell me about what you're feeling, and you know, sometimes they can't, and I try to give them some words of, well, are you sad? Are you mad? Are you frustrated? And like often they're like, yeah, all of the above. You know, and I think like it's often the case. You might be a little sad and mad and frustrated and you know, scared and all at the same time, you know, and that there's not like an exclusivity necessarily to our emotional multivalent complexities of our beings, you know. So it's
Yeah,
it's
you
like
touched on a lot of great things there. The multiplicity word is really good because when I say early on, can thoughts create emotion?
mm,
Well, we know they're so interconnected that you can't really separate it. But we invented the word thinking and feeling. So we think we can separate them,
yeah,
you know.
we try.
Yeah. Do
It's
you more do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
mm, happiness. Yeah.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
Mm, I think we are creating it to be detected.
Yeah, that's good. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Definitely light.
Wow. So you brought up poetry, that was great. Audre Lorde, the great poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master's house
Right. Yes.
using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded, said, "You can if you expose the tools."
Mm,
What new tool do you suggest? What new tool do you gravitate towards? And
mm.
just to put it into context, it doesn't have to be new. It's just what tool do you
Oh,
gravitate, and like all these questions, you put them into the context you want. So
yeah.
you can, just because I apply it with
Mhm,
this cute quote before, you can apply it to dismantling the master's house if you like, or just in general.
mhm. Yeah, well, I think it is very important to dismantle the master's house. So, I mean, I think the tool for tearing down the master's house is solidarity,
Yeah.
union with other people. You know, we have to come together, build our networks, our villages, our supports. Um, you know, because it also takes it's a multi-pronged effort, you know, it takes poets and filmmakers and writers and thinkers and scientists and you know what I mean? So it's in the it's in the combination of many minds working together, I think that we can hopefully dismantle the master's house. I'm only
Real.
laughing because I just feel like it kind of I've been feeling rather helpless and hopeless about this very issue lately. But trying to remind myself that it's possible to like that it
It
is
is. It's easy to feel hopeless at this time, but it's great that you said that. I love that word solidarity, and I'm there all the way. And since you have children, what new toy do you suggest?
ooh, oh, my son had these amazing I use them for my classes now, story cards. They're like, they're sets of cards with pictures on them, and they have different characters, and, different characters will show up in different cards, and there's different visual themes. There's no words on them, and you can shuffle them up, and you just take some, and you start to make a story, and it's so much fun. But it
No.
gets you know, little kids love it because it gets them to think about um, cause and effect or things like that. But I use them actually in some of my film classes when I'm teaching because I like to get students to think about like what is a cut, you know, or what is the connection between this image and this one? How are you connecting it in your brain, and how can we rethink about how those two things might be connected? If, especially if if I'm trying to push them towards thinking about non-linear, non-narrative connections, where it's not just about the story connecting it anymore, but it might be a metaphor or an association or something else. Yeah. But yeah, that's a really great toy.
That is super cool. Now, McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that artists, and like you've said, artists meaning painters, filmmakers, poets,
Mhm.
are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like about the inventions.
Mm.
So McLuhan struggled with this question his whole career. And I asked you it, why do humans ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Mm. Well, I don't know if I agree with his premise that it's just to cope with them. I think artists also do a lot to change and shape those things too, especially if you look at like science fiction writers and, um, you know, artists that work in kind of speculative realms,
Yeah.
or futuristic kind of realms. They're doing a lot of that work, of like imagining an alternative reality, that oftentimes comes to be and sometimes doesn't. But that work is so important, of like imagining the alternatives instead of just responding and coping to them, but like projecting forward. Um,
Right. But just to clarify, the premise is what Pound was teaching McLuhan was that the artist broadcast the hidden psychic effects, and then the users ignore it. It's not the artist. The
mm,
users, the people who are the viewers or the audience see the art, and
mm,
some of them understand that they can get an epiphany from the art, but
yeah.
some people look and they ignore what the hidden a message. Well, I don't like to say message, but just like the
Mhm.
hidden psychic effect. It really doesn't have anything to do with the artist and their
I
intention.
understand.
It's
Yeah.
that the artists do things that we can't always explain what they're doing, and they can, but there's some hidden psychic effect that they might be revealing to us about,
Mm,
you know, something. You
mhm.
know, NFTs is a big hot issue in the art world right now. I says, hey, um, uh, Duchamp invented NFTs years ago. Get over it. There's nothing there. It's just a concept.
Right.
But I can see how some artists don't like what's happening. But then the artists are using it, and other artists go, "Oh, that's horrible." And it's like, well, no, they're just using a tool. Get over it.
Yeah.
Why are you feeling, you know, invaded or
Uh-huh.
this you're like, there's no craft in it or whatever. So
Yeah.
it's sort of like the artist, like you go to the Ann Arbor Film Festival, we learn about things and we don't even know really that hidden psychic effect that it's teaching us, or not necessarily teaches, or again, the wrong verb is
Mhm.
exposing.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is a tough one because I think, as an educator, part of what my main goal is with my students is to get them to be more critical viewers
Yeah.
and consumers of media. I mean, and I think part of that is seeing the ways in which we, you know, tend to, especially in, mainstream outlets, Hollywood film, so many of my students, all they watch is Marvel.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, they want that entertainment value, and not to, there's entertainment is important too, but they don't always think about all the kind of psychic effect, if that's the word you
Yeah.
want to use, that is embedded within it. Another word other scholars might use is the kind of ideology, right, that's in it.
Yes.
So, I think that it's crucially important that we educate, um, especially anyone born after 1990, really, right? Like the millennial generation has grown up so much with this. It's just so, and
Yeah.
it's so second nature to them. So they don't always think about it in a critical way because it's just there, all the time. They're on TikTok, they're making content, they're already creating content like way, way, way more than I certainly was as I grew up in the 80s. So, we didn't even have dial up yet, till the 90s really. Um, but yeah, I think that's really important. Um, to
Well,
still,
why do you find any of your students fearing learning critical thinking? That's really the question. Do they fear that? Because
well,
there
yeah,
is
mhm,
they
I think
they
so. I get some students that are like, well, this is just going to ruin film for me, right? I won't ever be able to just enjoy film again. I think that's a poor argument because I think
Right.
you can enjoy films on lots of levels, right? Like I can still enjoy just like I'm watching Stranger Things right now and loving it, and it's not
Yeah,
like I think it's deep or I think it's like stellar cinema. I mean, it's not bad, but like,
yeah,
but like there's lots of different levels on which you can enjoy something, and it doesn't hurt to just basically add to those levels, right?
yeah.
It's like add more layers or more stories to your building. If you want to go deeper, you go deeper on it. If you want to stay, on ground floor, that's fine.
Good. Really well put in. So do you think artists have moral obligation?
Oh, no.
Boy, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions. But that one you got right. I've just added that question too. And you know what most people say? They go, well, they have a moral obligation to themselves and they have a moral obligation. Everybody has a moral obligation. But, I grew up with like Louis Buñuel and the street kids beat up a wino. And it's like, well, it didn't cause me to go beat up winos, but it did reveal something to
Yeah.
me, and people might take that as like, and I can't watch Harmony Korine. And I said,
Yeah.
it's same thing,
Yeah.
what Louis Buñuel did years before. So it's like, get over it. So yeah, that was good. I'm glad you said that. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Oh, old ideas, definitely. Or old ways of thinking, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, on the moral obligation issue, like, I think, like, yeah, I think art requires and necessitates the freedom to be whimsical, to be
Yeah.
playful, to make
Yeah.
mistakes. If you start to burden it with things like morals, it's no longer art in some ways, right?
Yeah.
Like then it becomes indoctrination or it becomes
Yeah.
um, something else. And I don't mean that to say that I don't think that we as general citizens in the world have responsibilities
Right.
or moral obligations. We all do, but I don't think it's fair to say, well, the artists have this moral obligation to
Yeah.
X, Y, or Z. I think
No.
it's fine to make work that is personal,
Yeah.
that is expressive of grief or whatever, or joy or whatever it might be, um, and that might not have any kind of moral responsibility, even to the artists themselves, because
Yeah.
you have to be able to um, free it up to be exploratory,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know because as soon as you said no, I just went to the next question. Was like, well, wait, let me suss that out. People are going to think, but I want to ask you this hypothetical question, which is stupid, but it's sort of similar. Kubrick pulled Clockwork Orange from UK screens only for 30 years because the cops went to him and said, your film's causing kids to beat up winos and they're going to come and beat up your family. And he says, okay. Now, it's a stupid question, but I'm just your general hunch. Do you think Kubrick really thought his film was causing people to beat up winos? Did he say it's I'm going to do it as a PR stunt? I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to pull it from UK screens only, or he truly believed his film was causing kids to beat up winos.
No, see, this is yeah. No, he was just covering his ass. Yeah, I mean, come on. Because you wouldn't make a film like that if you thought that people were going to go eat up winos. And I mean, I do think that there is an extent to which, yes, I think artists need to be responsible
Yeah,
for and thoughtful about the things that they put out in the world. But like, um, you know, that there's a very big spectrum there, a very big spectrum, and I don't think I think Kubrick was just probably trying to, yeah, save face or something,
I
but
love that. I love that cover his ass and save face because I interviewed James Harris with all these questions. He did like 8 films with Kubrick. He's a really good producer, really great guy. And he says Kubrick believed 2 things: family and film. And he says, nope, he was scared. They were going to come and get his kids. I was like, okay, and that's fine. He knew
I don't
Stanley and he,
know.
yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
him.
but I do believe Kubrick was much too intelligent to think that that was actually causing. He
Mm,
says it's in the zeitgeist, and I'm reflecting, and So, Julia, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
oh boy. Sorry, I'm still thinking about the last question.
That's fine. You could, yeah.
My
I zip along, so you can always feel free to go back.
Okay. Well, maybe we can come back to that one in a minute because I do want to make sure that I'm not
Yeah.
implying a more flippant response than I intend. Um, but we can come back to it. Okay, my earliest memory ever. Um, I have memories from when I was, I think, probably about 3 of some wallpaper that was in the house that I lived in and some blinds, like very tactile. It was
Yeah.
textured wallpaper. And it was dark, dark, dark blue. So it was in a very dark room. And the
It's
blinds were wood slats with those little
yeah.
like pieces of like a straight stick that you can use to make the whole blinds go open or closed.
It's amazing because we go back to the beginning of our conversation and you said visual,
Yeah.
was a dominant. And you know that 80 to 90% of people answer that with a visual.
Mm,
You also added tactility, the
yeah.
tactile in the visual.
Yeah. It
So
was textured
is,
wallpaper.
is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Hmm. I think it's a blessing.
Yeah. Tell me someone within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Mm. Within my immediate family, you mean my nuclear family that I grew up in?
You can define it as you will, whatever immediate family is. Yeah.
I definitely my sibling Riot has had a big impact on my life. They are also an artist, and um, we have a lot of similar interests, and yeah, they've impacted a lot of how I uh, move through the world. Yeah,
And
and
then outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you, and what was the impact?
um, outside of family, let me think about this. I had a professor in undergrad who he introduced me to visual anthropology. So at the time I had been kind of floundering all around in undergrad. I started as an English major, was an art major for a while, and then I found anthropology and got really interested in anthropology, but I missed the art. And then I found out that there was this niche thing where there was people who would make films that were also anthropologists. And I was like, oh, maybe I could combine my interests like that. So he kind of introduced me to that world, which led me on to a master's in that field. But I think what struck me the most about him was he was very, very um, kind and vulnerable in the classroom. I remember him telling us a story once, and he cried in the class. A grown male, and this was
Oh,
20 some years ago. So,
yeah,
and I just remember being really struck by how beautiful that was. And his
yeah.
lectures were lovely. He was very kind of a little bit of your stereotypical scatterbrained professor, but just kind of he was a storyteller in a lot of ways. And he would give these beautiful lectures about like Octavio Paz and mythological time. And like, I mean, yeah, it was lovely. And he set me on a path, I think, that, towards graduate school. Um, yeah.
Well, that's you again anticipated the next question. I was gonna say, what's the tipping point for you to go into anthropology? So that was sort of it in visual anthropology, but what was the tipping point to get you into filmmaking? Did
Mm,
you grow up, going to films in big theaters or watching them on TV? And then where'd you find that aesthetic? Like, filmmaking is a process. I wanna pursue that.
yeah. Um, so yeah, I mean, he introduced me to this discipline or field of visual anthropology, and I started just teaching myself then. This would have been in like 99, 2000, like around then. So it was like, here's some clunky SD camera. And I actually was like kind of breaking into some of the like campus edit suites to learn how to edit. I can't even remember. Gosh, I feel like we were putting VHS tapes in them or something back. It was great. It was very, I wouldn't even recognize the technology now, I think. Um, but so I was kind of self teaching, teaching myself how to shoot and edit at that time. And then I went and did this master's at the University of Manchester, and it was kind of half book based, typical classroom based stuff, and half hands on documentary filmmaking. But it was very at the time. This program was pretty dogmatic about like what you should and shouldn't do as a ethnographic filmmaker, and I left feeling very like like no, it's too restrictive, and I didn't understand why it needed to be so restrictive. And then I went and taught for a while at Virginia Commonwealth University before finding the program at Harvard, which was one of few PhD programs in the States that had both filmmaking and anthropology. So I went and did that program there, for that reason, to be able to make films and do the full PhD in anthropology. But now you asked me at the beginning when somebody says at a party, like, what do you do? I don't say I'm an anthropologist very often.
Yeah.
I have a PhD in anthropology, but it's not really what I do.
Yeah.
Um, I teach and I make films, and I appreciate the training that anthropology gave me, but I really kind of moved away from it in recent years. I just found that like a lot of the writing, really academic writing, I just found really stifling. And I was like, why am I making myself do this? If I'm
Yeah.
gonna write, like I would prefer to write in a different tone, in a different style.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so I've kind of shifted more into film practices and teaching. But yeah, in terms of getting into film, probably my real film education was from when I worked at a video rental store in Richmond, Virginia, that was called Video Fan, and it was an independently owned. If people are out there listening from Richmond, they know it recently closed a few years ago, but it was there for decades. It was an old house. We could smoke in there. Dogs were allowed in. It was like a whatever, everything goes kind of place, and it had an amazing collection. So
Yeah.
when I was working there, I would take stacks home and just watch them, like whole like 20 films a weekend, and just watch them. And they had a great foreign film section. They had a great cult film section.
Yeah.
Really, like, they had like even semi obscure, at least obscure to me, Eastern European animators like
Yeah.
Spunkmeyer and Yuri Trinka, and these, things you just wouldn't find in a typical video rental store.
No,
Uh,
it was a beautiful era, you
yeah.
know, because I came before that. I was showing all that stuff in Ann Arbor on campus before there was even VHS. Then the VHS was like, wow, we can get all this. And that's the thing, back to the Kubrick was funny is even though it was banned in the UK screens, you still could go to London and buy a bootleg copy of VHS on the street. So
Yeah.
it really wasn't banned, and it would be like in places like your place where I mean, that's an amazing history to
It was an
be
amazing.
to
Oh,
be a person at a video store. It's like you're really a librarian. It's like how
yeah.
we grew up with record stores. You go learn.
Yeah,
But,
I way more just from working there than, like,
yeah.
all the Really, just from watching lots and lots of stuff.
And so then, fast forward, I saw your film How to Rust in the Ann Arbor Film Festival and was really impressed by it. And I'm just curious, in general, you pursuing your practice as a filmmaker, a screenwriting teacher actually in Ann Arbor told me a great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process as a filmmaker?
Very little. I don't get hung up on worrying about whether my intentions are going to land exactly how I want them to. I think that's too stifling. So I understand that, especially with experimental film, like, people, my students sometimes would be like, well, I don't get it, like this idea of getting it. Like, what does that mean? Like, it's some kind of code to crack or something. It's like, no, you don't have to get it. It just has to, you have to feel something, maybe. Even if that feeling is confusion, that's something, right? But, as a filmmaker, I think for me, with a film like How to, or another film I made that is perhaps less straightforward than How to Rust, which was called Into the Hinterlands. It
Yeah.
it's like when it premiered at Berlin, I had a person in the audience ask me a question. They said, in a very convoluted way, they said, "So say I was out with some friends and I went and saw this movie, and I later met up with those friends at a bar, and they said, what was the movie about? What would you say?" And I was just kind of like laughing on stage because I was like, I don't know. I mean, like, it's, to me, that one wasn't about something. It
Yeah.
was just an experience, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's fine too, and if they came away from it, it was 40 minutes long, if they came away from it feeling like they wasted 40 minutes of their life, well, sorry. But I think there's lots of different functionalities for film too, like a long, a kind of rhetorical spectrum, right? Like sometimes we are trying to communicate something very clearly, and then it is more important that that gets communicated clearly. But other times it's not about that. Other times
Yeah.
it's, I just want to um, give you this experience of being thrown around with these bodies in a room for a while, or maybe I want to just flood you with pink light for 3 minutes or whatever, and I think that as film goers, what I would like to with my students, like get them more used to is that kind of openness. You have to be open to all of it, like open to all of those kinds of experiences, and not go in necessarily feeling like it's like a code to be cracked or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was good. In fact, they say well, first of all, I was going to ask you this. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much do you think of your viewing audience when you're making your film?
I don't really.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not getting big audiences anyway. There are way more like TikTok makers and YouTube channel, 16-year-old girls that are showing people what outfit they put on in the morning that have way bigger audiences than I will probably ever have.
Yeah.
If I cared about audience, I wouldn't be an experimental filmmaker, you know? I
But
do
it is
have a
amazing
small audience,
because
that's fine.
in a way, TikTok is the new experimental film. And, I'm not trying to and it's funny because do they really care? If I could psychoanalyze like 20 TikTok people, do they really care? Or is it just the act of making?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
because the question was, I was going to ask you is the cliche is the journey's more important than the destination. Why do we have to seek or name a destination if the journey's more important?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I had a realization this past year, kind of along those lines of thinking, that in teaching film and seeing the very big difference between teaching film in an art department versus teaching film in an English department versus teaching film in, a broadcast journalism program,
Yeah,
it's incredibly different. And like, if you're teaching students that want to go on in TV or journalism, product wins out over process. If you're
yeah,
teaching students in an art program, or maybe even an English department or something, then you can emphasize process more, and which is what I prefer. I
yeah,
prefer process over product, but um, they're different ways of thinking about film.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge for me as an educator is how to teach to both of those.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, because so that was good. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. Like
Mm,
clothing extends our skin, knife and fork extend our teeth, like the shutter in the camera or the projector extends our eyelid. And,
mhm,
maybe religion or philosophy, non-tangible things, extension of maybe consciousness.
mhm.
What does the moving image camera extend for you? What humanness does the moving image camera extend for you?
Well, in the film Into the Hinterlands that I was making, I was very deliberately experimenting with just that. I was deliberately not looking through the viewfinder a lot of the times. So I was interested with the idea of how the camera could operate as a shoulder or a foot.
As
Uh,
a shoulder?
yeah, or whatever, or a neck piece, side of my neck, or
That's amazing. Did you
a
see
knee, or
that?
a foot, or a leg.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
so I was
did
playing.
you see the film, Beyond? You have to see this film. Have you seen it?
I'm so you froze there for a second. What was it
Oh,
called?
yeah, have you seen the sorry to interrupt, but have you seen this film Beyond the Bolex?
No.
Oh, you've got to see this. This woman, like, it's like one of your students come up to you, Julie, and says, "Oh, I'm gonna make a film on my grandfather. He invented the Bolex." And the film teacher went, "What?" And it took her 16 years. But here's the thing. She check it out. It's worth seeing. It's
Okay.
an important film for anybody who's ever made films. But she interviews Barbara Hammer.
Oh,
And
amazing.
he says, the movie camera is an extension of my shoulder." She said the first thing you said.
Yeah.
That's amazing because you don't think of it as your shoulder. Most people say
Right.
extension of your
Well,
eye.
so this is the thing because we privilege sight and the eye and light.
Yeah.
But to me, the two of the other like really important components of what makes film is time and movement.
Yeah.
Like movement is crucially important. Like how you move with the camera, how the
Yeah.
camera moves in relationship to other things. I mean, the program at Harvard that I went through got kind of tagged as being really liking the kind of long takes. And I mean, I do like long takes, but I think that because of it allows you to experience movement differently. If you have to think about how am I going to move the camera to change this what's being shown instead of just cutting, right? Like or letting time unfold in that moment in a different way than just cutting. Yeah, so I think yeah, it is like a lot about the movement. I was when I was doing interviews about that film, I remember saying to somebody that like I was trying to think about how I could see with my knees or see with my feet or see with my shoulder or something. But I think it wasn't just about them, like those parts of my body seeing, but like how they move, too. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Really good. Peter Greenaway said cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. Are experimental filmmakers telling stories a different way or doing something completely different? Like me and you can watch Tony Conrad's The Flicker, 15 minutes of black and white flickering on and off.
Mhm.
A story could go through our heads, but he did, it's not necessarily traditional. This is storytelling. And Andrew Noren even says that you put one frame next to another, that's storytelling. But
Mhm.
that aside, your opinion, because you've experienced enough of this delving from anthropology and ethnographic film into experimental film. Do you think we're telling stories a different way or is it something else?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I don't know if you've been following the discussion. Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry, my phone is off, but it's coming through my computer. Um, I don't know if you've been following the discussion on world records about Beyond Story. It's fabulous. I highly recommend it. Really interesting stuff there. And this is I it's mostly talking about within documentary film, I think. and the kind of harmfulness that story can do when it is imposed upon other forms. I think story, I think part of the problem is that the way we think of story is so restrictive, this kind of hero's journey, rising action, climax, denouement, like, oh, so, ugh. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think, at the end of the day, every film is time based. So it has a beginning and it
Yeah,
ends, right? It might not even have a middle. I don't know. I guess it kind of has to have a middle if it has a beginning and an end. But whether or not that is story, I
yeah,
don't know. I don't really care, to be honest. I think story is a sort of fabricated commodification package deal that we like to call these things so that we can brand them. So story is a way of doing that. It's like, oh, the story. And that's why I think when that person asked me, what's this film about? I was sort of just like,
yeah.
about? Like, I don't know. What did you feel when you watched it? Like,
That's a beautiful comeback. I'll revert to Frank Zappa, and when he was promoting his film, he says, "It's, Baby Snakes," he says, "It's about love, it's about hate, it's about 2.5 hours long." So, if someone asks you, "What's your film about?" You go, "It's about 40 minutes."
yeah, right. It's 40 minutes long. It's about
Yeah. Hollis Frampton, who's a very articulate experimental filmmaker and one who had a sense of humor, said narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we are waiting to die.
wow.
So, I mean, there's a lot going on there, but he's basically saying, storytelling's about this thing we think because we're going to die, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah, well, I think stories are a way that we try to make sense of the world, right?
Right.
Because we narrate our own lives all the time. When we see a friend and we say, "Oh, I got to tell you what happened the other day," we narrativize it, and that's a
Yeah.
way that we make sense of what happened, and we pull out. We don't tell them every detail from the moment we got up that day, right? We
Yeah.
pull out and select details that we deem important, right, to tell that story. So it's a way of making sense of things and of yeah, but I also think that like when it's too restrictively imposed upon, expressive forms, it can be just yeah, ugh, like I mean even semi unconventional narrative structures or something, like there's so many ways in which this is a Western construction, uh, patriarchal construction, a
Totally.
capitalist construction that privileges certain types of heroes, that privileges the fact that there even is a sort of singular hero instead of a community of people that are doing something together. So there's lots of ways that, I think that story is problematic. Um,
Yeah.
but it's also important.
Yeah.
So it's one of those tools, I guess, that can be really powerful and do really great things, but also can be really like easily taken up by the evil, the evil capitalists in the world that just want to like brand things and say, oh, yeah, now we have this package of story. It's this great
Yeah.
thing that we can put it together with some promo and blah 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 and put a bow on it and send it off.
Yeah. Yeah, when you think cinema's only 130 years old, it was hijacked by narrative, and
Yeah.
it's never looked back, and but I really appreciate a lot of what you're saying resonates with the same thinking I come from. And since we met through the Ann Arbor Film Festival, this question's a doozy. Let's imagine me and you are sitting with George Manupelli 61 years ago, and we're gonna start the Ann Arbor Film Festival.
Okay.
Keep in mind it is a fraction of animation and documentary, but it's mainly experimental. And that's wavered now too, because now there's experimental. We had straight docs way back, just
Wow.
a doc on Les Paul, the guitar player. It wasn't experimental. I mean, we had a lot of docs over the years, but it's mainly known as an experimental film festival. Chick Strand was starting Canyon Cinema at the same time with Bruce Bailey, and she says, we were trying to recreate our 11-cent movie going experience. We would show a newsreel, a cartoon, and then an experimental film. Then Brackage came along and said, no, don't show the other stuff, just show experimental. So the question is, Me, you, and George are starting Ann Arbor. Should it be more inclusive or more exclusive?
Well, what makes it more inclusive or more I mean,
Well,
I would go for, not just experimental film because you can
yeah,
have experimental docs and you can have experimental
yeah,
animation and
yeah.
yeah,
Well, no,
yeah,
that's the answer I was fishing for because people like they do go, no, that they already have a venue, say exclusive. But then what we're doing is we're forming the aesthetic for people to realize there's not this wide palette. It's like, you know,
and there's conventional forms of those other types too, there might be tons of doc fests, but, like, many of them privilege a particular kind of doc, right? That's
oh
not
yeah.
an experimental form necessarily. Yeah.
Well, now it's festival film. It is a genre of filmmaking. You make a film festival specific film, I found. And that leads in perfectly to this. What are the services and disservices of marginalizing experimental film? Jackson Pollock was on the cover of Life magazine in 1949. Regular folks could start developing an aesthetic on experimental painting. There was no Bruce Conner or Maya Deren Life magazine covers. Generally, it's privileged, entitled, and I call them rich art kids who develop an avant-garde aesthetic and dominate the experimental film world.
Mm,
Any comment?
hmm. Um, I think there's lots of not rich, not white experimental filmmakers out there creating their own aesthetics, and the festivals and the venues and the micro cinemas need to find them. Or not just
You,
find them, they need to engage with them because they're there and they're doing it. And I don't think
you
it's
are
a
my hero. That you are my hero. That is such a great answer because
but
it's
it's
easy.
also not such an exclusive thing anymore. You can make a movie on your phone,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it can be great,
yeah.
you know?
Oh, it is. It's amazing because you would could imagine all the people that I ask who are our peer group in Ann Arbor will go, no, they don't want, they go, yeah, it's true. We can't do anything about it because kids go to art museums and they develop a aesthetic for experimental art and they might not develop like what is experimental art. But you're saying, let's go out and being a curator also, let's go out and find them because they're there, you know, they're
Definitely.
out there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, rich white kids don't have any claim to creative expression. I don't care if they've been taken to art museums or not, you know what I mean? And I think especially in an experimental realm
Yeah.
because, like I mean, maybe the 1% of the 1% of those rich white kids were actually being taken and being exposed to art that was actually experimental, like maybe they were going to, just some like neighborhood art museum or whatever, but like they weren't being shown, experimental filmmakers probably, unless
Right.
they were like my kids and I make them watch stuff. but, um, but maybe if one of their parents was an experimental filmmaker, but
Right, right.
kids aren't growing up consuming experimental film. But nonetheless, by nature, young people are experimental everywhere,
Yeah.
and they will
Yep.
make forms of expression with whatever they have. And nowadays, you don't need a lot to make a film. You don't need a
Yeah.
big budget. You don't need a crew. You don't need lights. You don't, like you just have to take your phone and go record some stuff and put it together. And that's what TikTok is, right? And like,
Yep.
yeah. And, um, I think that the problem is the disconnect between the curators and people who are operating outside of those
Yeah.
very, very narrow realms.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I showed experimental films to people in Venice for many years, and sometimes half the audience would be homeless people who had no sense of experimental film, and they'd come up and go, well, I always remember I showed Mike Kelly's feature. Have you
Mm,
ever seen that? It's an amazing film. It's really truly art. And this guy goes, that was amazing. And it's like the normal person would go, what the fuck was that?
yeah,
It's like totally. Michael Apted, I spoke with him 40 years ago. And I said, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know
Yeah.
Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922, but it really flourished in the 80s with MTV. And he said, because to the point where Marty Scorsese said, I cut my films faster because of MTV. So Michael Apted said, because people have learned to take in information faster. And I asked this question with a bias. Can humans literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
I think we can. Yeah. I mean, if you look at like debate teams, for example, there's I didn't know this until recently. There's like a speed debate category where they talk so fast. And I had a student once when I was teaching at Harvard for a year who made a film actually about it, and I was blown away. And I said, he was actually a judge for these rapid debate teams.
Yeah.
I was like, can you actually understand them? And he was like, oh yeah, you can actually understand like 200 words. I can't remember what he said, like some large number of words per minute. Like, or the way that we now, with audio playback, you can play something back at double speed and you can follow it. I think you can train. Yeah, I think we can train ourselves to take things in more quickly. But the question is why? Right? I mean, and what is being lost then if we just play? I had a student in my world cinema class this semester. I'm not going to call him out by name, though I should. Who told me that I assigned for them to watch Atanajawat, the Fast Runner. The film by Zacharias Kunuk. And it's 3 hours long. And I told them, I was like, it's 3 hours long, so be prepared for that. And he admitted that he watched it at double time.
Yeah.
I was like,
no, they know they're able to do that. It's amazing. But the real hidden question here, Julia, is it literally possible for humans to multitask?
Oh, that? No, I don't think so.
Wow.
I mean, I can tell you as a working mom with 2 young kids that I can multitask, but my brain is usually only in one place.
Yeah.
And it suffers, that splintering. It's all sides suffer by trying to multitask. I think we all need to learn how to focus on one thing at a time. Yeah. Do ourselves and everyone around us a favor.
What was the motive of the cave artist? Your hunch, your guess.
Oh, I like this question. I'm just entertaining all these ideas. I'm like, was it expression? Was it bragging?
Like bragging. I don't get bragging much. That's
was
good.
it documentation? I think it was probably just, that's a great question. Like, was it to teach someone else how to hunt? Was it? I think it was probably just. I think it was this happened.
Yeah.
I was here, kind of, like the scrawling on the proverbial bathroom stall.
Yeah.
I was here.
Yeah, the film that Herzog made on it, Dream of Forgotten, or whatever it's called, Forgotten Dreams, Shadows of Forgotten Dreams or something. He made a doc on cave artists, and it's based on a New Yorker article that said, the cave artists invented like 5 things, and one of them was spray paint. Like you put your hand there and then you take and you blow it and it leaves the imprint.
Yeah.
And it's so in the people's lifespan was 15 years old when that was happening. So the people who invented art were teenage taggers.
Yeah.
So that is like, I was here. That's who invented art in a funny way. But I loved how you survey it. You have this good sense of what we study is Pascal, the mathematician philosopher. He says, in order to understand anything, you have to understand this end of the spectrum and that and everything in between.
Yeah.
So you had this sense of going expression, bragging, documenting, teaching, and then you lean towards one. But there is no one answer to anything. But So what's more important, conviction or compromise?
Oh, compromise, definitely.
Wow. Where'd you get that from? The way your parents raised you or on your own?
Well, without going too deep, I was raised in a very strict religious household. So conviction was always what I think they wanted to instill in their children. Um, but yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for compromise.
It's amazing. Do you pray?
No,
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
welcome.
I like that because, the way you said that, there was a hesitancy in there. I love that. Um, do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Say that again. Do evil people? No, I do not believe that evil people exist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now
How
I
do
tell
you
my kids this all the time, because they get like from speaking of like media, they get these representations of good guy, bad guy all the time. And I'm just
Yeah,
like, no, there's no good guy, bad guy. This is like I'm giving you like the preschool like teacher's version of this, but like what is important for kids to learn is this like you have good choices and bad choices, and everybody makes good choices sometimes, and everybody makes bad choices sometimes,
that's it. Yeah.
right? But there's no evil people.
It's beautiful. And then how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'm gonna set it up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says,
Mm,
if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the samurai and the mob. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy.
mm,
So it's a lot of thought. Basic question is, Julia, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
mm. Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I mean,
Like if one of your kids come home and says there's a bully, it appears to be an enemy to them. What do you say to them? What kind of how
walk
do you
yeah, walk away, ignore
walk
them. Yeah.
away? Yeah,
I mean, I guess I would agree with Alan Watts then that like
yeah,
by acknowledging them, you're empowering them. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
So James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin over 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Mm. Yeah. Well, I think any creative endeavor has the power to select, right? To pull things out, to pull the signal from the noise. Um, and to also get us to see things in different ways. Um, so even that tree, if we keep it at a pretty basic level, I'm looking at trees out my window right now and they're amazing. And I do take a lot of time to actually appreciate them. But I would also go into a cinema and look at a picture of a tree on the screen for a long time and then probably come out and still see the trees differently.
Yeah,
Um, I think that, yeah, to get us to see things differently is important. And
yeah.
yeah. So I think that's what that's for. I mean, yeah, we all live it anyway, but we also live different realities too. You know,
Yeah.
we don't all live the same lives or have the same privileges or the same experiences. So we also get that from art as well.
Is perception reality?
Perception reality. I think reality is shared perceptions.
Yeah.
the shared part being crucial.
That's good. Lily Tomlin said reality's just a collective hunch.
Yeah. She's from Detroit.
I
Yeah.
know it. I love to quote her because she's someone I'm really proud of being from
Yeah,
Detroit.
it is just a I mean, like, yeah, I think, these last few years we have all if anyone is paying attention with a pulse, they should be very wary of what we think of as reality,
Yeah.
because it's being rewritten right under our eyes all the time, or
Yeah.
attempting to be as well. Not that I'm not saying that facts aren't important, they are, but that's where the shared part comes in, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to go into that Harvard experience for you because did you attend the sensory ethnography lab
Yeah.
yourself? You were a member of them?
Mhm.
And so, they say they combine aesthetics and ethnography to like, so now I'm mispronouncing the word. How do you say it?
Okay.
Yeah, is the study of individual cultures.
Mm.
And if you study the roots of aesthetic, that comes from perception, beauty, and taste.
Mhm.
So it's sort of, I would love to, and then, it's like we want to get the viewpoint of the culture from their point of view. But before we go into that, I just like this word taste because you brought up sound, and I know you're very aware of your soundtracks for your movies. I love the percussion in How to Rust. Amazing.
Yes,
Yeah,
he's great.
amazing. So, a friend of mine in the music world says there's three things: technique, theory, and taste, just to break down music. Technique, you learn how to play it. Theory is you know what chords you're playing. How does one acquire taste?
Mm.
Either in music or in film or in art, or
Well,
any.
yeah, I mean, Pierre Bourdieu wrote a whole book on this called Distinction that I very deliberately did not read, although I should have. Um, if you've ever read any Pierre Bourdieu, it's it's like slogging through a swamp because it's usually translated from French. He only wrote in French, and it's it's not very accessible at all. And so I kind of avoided that one. Although I think if I understand, the argument that he was making in this book was that taste is social, right? That it's class based and it's socialized, and that the things that you come to appreciate on an aesthetic level are a part of a culturally specific environment. Um, which I think I would agree with. Um, but I don't think that I don't know. I mean, you're talking about taste as in like, not as
Well,
in like taste.
yeah, well, that's the funny thing is that some people go, well, it's my gut feeling. So
Mm.
that then you're thinking of taste.
Oh,
So,
interesting. Yeah.
here's what most people say. How do you acquire taste? They go exposure. They go
Mhm.
what you're exposed to. So,
Mhm.
this is when you say class based from this French guy, this is amazing because I know a lot of white kids who grew up with black nannies and they learned how to love black music because of their nannies. So
Yeah.
that's like, well, where's the class base there? It was broken down
Mm.
in a
Although
way.
though if it was the nanny, I mean, there's still like a system there of like, yeah,
Right,
but
but we don't know. I mean, it's who exposed them to the
right,
music.
right,
And
exactly.
then,
Who's
you
exposed?
know,
Right.
we
Yeah.
when I grew up in Michigan in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, we had transistor radios and we were hearing reggae and gospel
Mhm.
and pop music all mixed together. We
Mhm.
heard the Israelites by Desmond Decker. No one knew what reggae was. It
Mm.
was a pop hit. So
Mm.
it was all smushed together.
Yeah.
Then we heard Oh Happy Day. That's a gospel song. We
Uh-huh.
weren't saying, oh, that's the gospel station. It was pop radios. So we acquired a taste because it was more widespread.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily align myself with Pierre Bourdieu's writing on this. I think
Right.
what he was writing in, this was, I think that book was written in the early 70s, I want to say. I remember there being some section about fabrics actually. And his argument with like the class-based thing was that like the working class, wears tweed and the upper class wears like silk and blah blah blah. And
Right.
this is part of how their taste or their
Right.
um, gets formed or whatever. But I mean, I think, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think exposure absolutely matters, but how and when and what you're exposed to is often a function of these other social factors, right? Like
Right.
who you're hanging out with,
Who you're
especially
hanging out with. Yeah.
don't have a lot of control often over that.
Yeah.
It's what your parents are putting you in contact with or whatever. I mean, my son is 4 and he loves punk music.
Uh,
And I mean, like, I wasn't like shoving it down his throat or anything, but his dad does have like a big, pretty large record collection. But he was gravitating towards like The Wire at age 3. He was like, Dad, can we put that song on? That's like 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's what he likes. He likes the real like driving beats and stuff.
right.
But yeah, I mean, I think yeah, what if he had never heard that? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. He would have different tastes probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a funny thing to explore because it's same with the sensory ethno lab. And they're going, well, let's study these other cultures. So,
Mm,
the way I learned it is that Edmund Carpenter was the first in 1959 to say, well, give them the cameras.
mm,
We don't film them. So, I mean, I'm just curious of this crossover, of combining aesthetics with
yeah.
anthropology
It's
studies.
all very problematic. I think. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of wincing here. I mean, Edmund Carpenter, yeah, he was, it's all like although I understand that right now there's a big centennial um, of Robert Flaherty's None of the North.
Yeah.
It came out 100 years ago, and the Flaherty Seminar, I believe, is doing some kind of, I think they're the ones putting it on with somebody else, like centennial. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm hesitating to say celebration because they're taking a very critical approach to it
Yeah.
because it's complex, right? Like it's a
Yeah.
complicated, and I think, anthropology has always grappled with this, and
Yeah.
sometimes they are better by it, and most of the times they're not. And
Yeah.
um, I think there was okay, here, I'll just give you another little anecdote without calling people out. But I could say there was another program that took a very different perspective than the program at Harvard. And that program at that school was very much more of the mind that you should give the camera over to whoever you're
This,
um,
yeah.
and I think that I don't know. I think that like there's a lot of in between there.
Yeah.
There's no easy way to get yourself off the hook with like settler colonial guilt. I mean, there's no way to just sort of like, oh, this will make it all okay. And now these like, settler colonial people can go and just film all these brown bodies all over the world. Like, no, it's still really problematic, right?
Yeah.
But I also don't necessarily think that that means that we should all just only make films about ourselves.
Yeah.
I think there are respectful ways to engage with people. It takes time, I mean, that's the thing. It takes time, and it takes um, being really intentional and being really and knowing when to not do it.
Yeah.
You knowing when to say, yeah, that's not my story to tell, and I need to just stay out of that project. Like that's also a part of it.
Yeah.
Um, so I think like it's complex. I think to me, what drew me to this, and it's had, like all these institutions. It's an institution. Um, what drew me there though was its focus on the aesthetic side of things. So I had come out of this program at Manchester that was very dogmatic at the time. I think it's changed since then too, but at the time when I was there, it was like You shouldn't direct. You shouldn't, so much as ask someone to move away from a window because you're just there to document. So it took this whole kind of idea that you could actually be some kind of objective observer of something going on. And I was drawn to the fact that at the program at Harvard, they were at least interested in exploring much more the aesthetics of loosely called documentary practices,
Yeah.
and also that there was a much wider spectrum of human experience that could be conveyed if we just stopped getting stuck on some of these things that felt like this is how you have to do this kind of film. And so that's what I appreciated about it. It was a little bit more, yeah, it allowed for aesthetics to come into play. It made space for that.
Well,
And
I really appreciate what I find in talking with you is you're a comprehensivist. You're looking at for the big picture.
mm,
You can have points of view, but in order to understand things, it's being comprehensive.
yeah,
And I really appreciated your panel in Ann Arbor this year.
oh,
Really, truly enlightened me. And I ended up interviewing Ariel with all these same questions
great.
a couple months ago. And, just to touch on something I brought up there is the female gaze or the human gaze, and it's something we study is where did human eye contact come from? Is that innate or is that invented? And you can study it where the kid looks at the mother's breast and looks at the eyes and they relate the eyes to food. So you're learning eye contact. Now, eye contact could be innate or could be invented. But then we get Laura Mulvey saying, in 72-ish, I think, the female gaze. And then we get, I don't know if you've seen Brainwashed by Nina Menkins yet, but I haven't seen it, but it's the big film on the female gaze
Mm,
that hasn't played much. I don't know if it's been suppressed or what, but it played at Sundance. But it's worth seeing the premise and studying what she's talking about, specifically Hollywood in the male gaze. I mean, it's evident.
mhm,
But my thought is, or my question to you is about Alice Guy Blanchet, who was inventing cinema,
mhm,
narrative cinema, when Méliès was,
mhm.
and she got blackballed out of film history. And then this woman made this amazing documentary called Be Natural, which really susses out. I mean, the big revelation is Eisenstein saw Alice's film when he was 8 years old and basically got the idea of the bullet hitting the glass in the Odessa. Do you know this? I mean, a woman got this guy who changed cinema because he went and saw her film at 8. That is remarkable. And like, why didn't we all know this? It's like we should be ashamed. But I'm curious your thought, and sorry to go on and on, but it's basically Alice Guy Blanchet basically grew up probably forming a gaze, an aesthetic for gaze from male paint and male photographers
Mhm.
because they dominated painting and photography. So how much is there innate in us a female gaze and a male gaze, or is it just a human gaze?
Mm, I think it's a human gaze, but well, no, I don't accept either of those options.
Yeah, yeah, no, I don't mean to hold you. You don't have to nail
No,
it.
I think
It's just
that,
a jumping off point. Yeah, I'm not trying to get you to
yeah,
say
no, I mean, I think, yeah, I think that, yeah, to your point, I mean, I think that Alice was probably, yeah, developing what she did, based on what she, again, was exposed to, other painters, other forms of expressive art, that tend to, yeah, objectify women's bodies and so on and so forth. But I think to come back to the beginning of our conversation, you know, and return to Audre Lorde, like, you know, we can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, right? You know, I love thinking of films like Lizzie Borden's Born in Flames, you know,
Yeah.
which, like, you know, sure, it's, you know, I think that it takes these kind of radical, you know, films that are speculative futurist or formally really radical to expose and reshape the way that we um, think about film. You know, I
Yeah.
don't think it's so just like a switch, right? Like it's back to this issue of exposure, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're trying to change the way that you perceive, um, it's not like you can just put some different glasses on and suddenly you have the female gaze or you have the male gaze.
Yeah.
It's about like rewiring the brain and the associations that the brain makes to certain images that it sees and certain combinations of images and certain framings and certain cutting patterns and all of it, right? And so only over time through exposure to formats and structures and topics and content and aesthetics and affect that is different than all of that that we have now had 100+ years of in our systems, right? In our multi-generational ears and eyes. Can we start to rewrite those patterns? You know, like I think it will take time. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
No,
to
I think,
build the tools and to use the tools,
yeah,
your new tools, right? That to dismantle the master's house, right? To build
it's
those new tools.
it's so beautiful how you brought it back to Audre Lorde. You're a really good listener. You got this, you have pattern recognition supreme, but it's funny because immediately when you said Lizzie, I thought of Agnes Varda's Gleaners and I, which is one of my favorite films of all time, where she takes her hand and she's driving in a car and she looks in the rear view mirror and she uses her hand to design the framing device, you
Yeah.
know. And it's amazing because that really is, she truly is you know, an icon of female gaze. I mean, she got blackballed out of the fucking French New Wave like anybody's business, but she really pulled through with a huge career, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I'm a
You
big
know, and I would say she does have a female gaze thing going, but I just don't want to have it like, oh, it's a male gaze or a female gaze. I think it's the human gaze, but I think there probably are tendencies because the woman gives birth. It's just like, here's this stupid question I always ask, but I don't always ask, but I have to ask you, what caused matriarchy?
What caused it?
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. What caused it? Um, hmm, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that.
Well,
Uh,
that's fine. I've examined it because it's sort of a stupid question. I asked McLuhan's son what caused patriarchy, and he says men. What caused matriarchy is one woman said it best. She said love. She said what she meant was that the woman gives birth. So if the woman gives birth, that's different. The man isn't giving birth.
right. Well, I
So
think I hesitated because okay. So first of all, though, to get back to the question here that of the male gaze, the female gaze. I mean,
yeah,
the problem of that is that it's binaristic, right?
yeah,
I mean, that already is why it's like, no, this is not a lens that you put on, like changing your
yeah.
prescription glasses to your sunglasses, right? Like it's a spectrum. It's not. Um,
It's not
it,
binary, it's
yes,
spectrum.
it's analog, not digital, right? Like how you,
Yeah,
it's a gradient. It's not a chunk in a way. It can't be chunked into these categories, right? Like we have a spectrum of gender identities that will create a
yeah,
spectrum of filmic forms. And so that's why I think too, though, why I mean, I'm not sure that saying just a human gaze solves the problem because humans are all different. You know,
yeah,
it's not like we're singular in this. I mean, we share some things as common humanity, sure.
yeah.
But if film is anything, it's specific, right? That's part of its beauty. It has a specificity to it. and it's a complex specificity. So
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a generalizing form, right? So it does speak to
Yeah.
specifics, and it's important to understand that those specifics, though, can fall along a spectrum of experiences and expressions. But
Yeah.
but but to then your next, um, what was the next thing that you were on to after
And
that?
then I asked what caused
Well, what caused matriarch? Okay, yeah, yeah. So I think the again, so my hesitation on that one is because matriarchy is a social structure,
is a social structure. Yeah.
like patriarchy is, right? And there are cultures in the world, is the anthropologist side of me now. Like there are matriarchal cultures in the world. What caused them to be matriarchal instead of patriarchal is, I think, just good old human variation. Now, the reason that patriarchy has become the dominant form in our globe, I think, is caused by other things like the predominance of capitalism. Capitalism and patriarchy go very well together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I think that, if you were to say, well, I think if matriarchy as a social structure were to have flourished more on this planet, I think we would have less capitalism. I think we would have different forms of exchange. I think we would have different ways of thinking about how resources are distributed. I think we would have, so I'm not sure how to say what caused matriarchy, because matriarchy is a word that we give
Yeah.
hindsight to a social structure that forms organically in different places in the world.
Yeah.
And again, along different spectrums, there's probably different, forms of matriarchy, just as there are different forms of patriarchy, but or there certainly are. So
But
yeah.
yeah, no, you really brought up a lot of great things. You've taught me so much, but one thing that really came to mind was John Waters rooted for the Wicked Witch of the West in Wizard of Oz. Now, see, that's funny. Like that was a different way. Like, did he grow up and become a serial killer? No, he made movies that but it's like we want to think, well, you're normal. You grow up and root for the good witch. And so, you telling your kids that. But what I'm most curious about is what I find your use of the word spectrum is what we call in the McLuhan-Joyce studies is suspended judgment. McLuhan actually said understanding is not a point of view.
Mm,
We think, oh, that your point of view means you understand something. No, he's saying understanding is not having a point of view. It's understanding the spectrum.
right.
How did you acquire that? This thinking of spectrum thinking on your own, for the way your parents raised you? How did you acquire that
Um,
or develop it?
I I think from observing the world, I've seen people, I mean, I think being an anthropologist in some ways, like anthropologists are always trying to like put things into categories, right? Or like to understand them. And I think what they grapple with, and why I think I eventually was just like, ugh, I can't do this anymore. I'm just fed up with it. Was that like, of course, it's always messy, right? But I mean, that was what drew me to anthropology, was the messiness of it. It's a soft science, not a hard science,
Yeah.
but I think at the end of the day, like I just couldn't reconcile some of the impulses behind the the studying that felt to me like it was still trying to sort of understand in a way that came from this kind of understanding through taxonomy, sort of, rather than just letting things be, letting people
Yeah.
be in all of their beautiful multiplicities. And
Yeah.
um, so but I think that, yeah, I like that. I like that understanding is not a point of view. But yeah, that's,
It's pretty heavy. It says now, I asked for 90 minutes. We're at the 90-minute point. Can you go more? Or you gotta fly.
I can go for a little bit, like
But
maybe
give me an example about how many, or what's ideally you could go for how many more minutes, just so I can gauge it.
like 10, 15.
Great. Thank you so much. That was really good. And so T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Poetry is outing your inner dialogue. Um, I mean, my inner dialogue is pretty fragmented, I think. Yeah, I think it's poetry. I think it's more poetry than prose.
Yeah.
Full sentences, certainly. Yeah.
You'll love this. Abigail Childs, great experimental filmmaker. I says, "What language is your inner dialogue in?" She says, "I wish I knew." Okay, George Manupelli's mantra is ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. Cecil Taylor, great jazz pianist, says, "I'm just a vehicle, and this stuff just comes through me." Is art making more self-expression or more your vehicle for whatever culture, technology, or environments are dominant?
Well, ourselves are formed within the culture and technology. So, um, yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, I'm an anthropologist, so of course, I think culture plays a big role. I do. I think like and temporal, all of the contexts, right? Temporal context, cultural
Yeah,
context. I was born now, not 100 years ago. You know, those things certainly shape who I am and how I express myself and what I express. Yeah. As do all the minutia of like every moment of my 42 years of existence on this planet.
yeah. It's funny because I've asked this question for years and people give me examples. And my favorite was the guy from Negative Land said, Missy Elliott learned how to sing from car alarms. So the real hidden question to that question is
That
it-
makes me think, but let's before you go on to the question, let me just say I also recently was hearing because we just had the Detroit Electronic Music Festival.
uh,
It's now called Movement, happened recently, and they were interviewing Carl Craig on the radio, and he said that he used to work as a repairman for copy machines, and he would just listen to all the different copy machines going, and he would hear the polyrhythms of the copy machines. And I was like, "Oh my god, that's amazing!" Yeah, right.
totally, totally. That's Captain Beefheart wrote a song from listening to the offbeat on the windshield wipers in a car once, you
Yeah,
know. No,
so
copy machine noise is really that is like, yeah, that is electronic music.
yeah.
But the hidden question there is, can art making be egoless?
No, I think no. Well, no, I think no. I mean, if it's egoless, then maybe it's nature, right?
Yeah.
It's happening without us.
Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Whew, being a woman.
Wow. I've never had that
Being born
answer.
in a female body has been I've been told was a weakness and I've learned as a strength.
That's
um,
pretty. I've never had that answer. That's so how have you flipped it into a strength? You try harder or how what do you mean?
no, I think I learn I mean, I say this as an ongoing practice, right? Like I'm not that there yet. It's hard to throw off the shackles of society that tell you to be a certain way, right? I mean that by I think recognizing that very what I just said,
Yeah.
that like being born into the body that I was born in
Yeah.
is what it is not what other people and norms will
Yeah.
lead you to believe. Um, yeah.
Do you consider yourself a feminist?
Mhm.
Yeah. And back to that spectrum thing, I'm still really infatuated with that. So, do you find your peers have that kind of suspended judgment spectrum thinking?
I would
Or is
hope so, but I mean, my peers, I mean, yeah,
whether that's academic or your friends, do
I mean,
they're
I think
like,
we all, it's hard because I think we, implicit bias comes in, there's all kinds of ways in which we aren't always suspending judgment, right? Like we
yeah,
make judgments all the time and don't realize it
yeah,
all the time. But it's more of like an aspirational,
right.
goal. Yeah.
Julia, tell me one major element of your creativeness, whether it's teaching or making films, that's changed, and one major element that stayed the same in the decades you've been working.
Well, definitely what has changed is that when I started off, especially in more anthropological filmmaking, in order to create work, I really felt that I had to immerse myself in those worlds entirely, almost like method acting, like I had to be so fully there for long, long periods of time, like field work. I had to go do the field work and be in the field. Um, and that was how I would make work for the first, several years of making work. And then the pandemic hit, and I also now have kids, and so not only was I, isolated from being able to immerse myself with other people that I wanted to make films with, but I also my time got fragmented, and I couldn't just have like huge chunks of time to do this anymore. And so I've had to learn how to work in tiny chunks, 20 minutes sometimes. I did a retreat once with some folks from Creative Capital, and they had a whole section on time management to teach artists how to be better about time management. And I remember saying I had my son was a baby at the time, and I had him with me on the retreat. He was that little. So I was literally like bouncing him on my knee or breastfeeding him or bouncing him in the bouncer, like while taking notes. And I said when we had to do the breakout sessions for time management, I was like, I have no time. I don't have any time to manage. I am terrible about time management. And this woman, in her wisdom, looked at me and she said, "Are you kidding me?" She was like, "You have better time management than anyone here, and I guarantee it."
Wow.
I realized it because you recognize the importance of 20 minutes if you have it. And I was like,
Yeah,
"Great." And it made me realize when my daughter was born, I was still writing up my dissertation. I was writing in the middle of the night on my phone, you know, uh, snippets of thoughts because I had a split second where my brain was working. And so I think, it's kind of I've realized now that it's a luxury to have big chunks of time. And a lot of people don't have that. We
yeah,
have busy lives, we have work, we have caregiving obligations, we have these other things. And so the creative process has to be able to adapt to
yeah,
that. And that's hard because you learn to work a certain way and then you have to learn to work a different way. And so I think it has changed some of the ways that my the more recent work. I have two shorts that I think will be coming out pretty soon. They're very different. They're much more personal, and the process, right, is different. So the product reflects that. Like they aren't these immersive, like throw you into someone's world kind of things. Well, they might throw you into my world, but they were created in tiny snippets of time over
yeah,
many, many, many years, um, because that's what I have to work with. You know.
yeah.
But
How
the
do
other,
you
go ahead.
how do you find peace of mind?
Um, Meditation, turning the radio off when I need to,
Nice.
walking,
How
walking,
walking, I love that. Um,
walking in the
if
woods.
perfect lead in, if you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Hmm. I think Oh man, this is a tough one, and I'm gonna like get all like verklempt or something. I think I would probably like tell my 12-year-old self, like, you are enough.
Yeah, beautiful.
I think I felt a lot of pressure as a kid to like be a certain way,
Yeah,
and I think that I wasn't told that enough. That you are enough, just as you are.
beautiful. Thornton Wilder said in 1928, art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time.
Yeah.
You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm
Yeah.
not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
What's it really all about for me? I mean, I enjoy it. I wouldn't do it if I don't enjoy it. But I mean, I think, that's I like that because it's not the place to just yeah, you don't tell all necessarily in your work. There are definitely sides that come out in other ways. Um, yeah, so I mean, for me, I think I often like when I would have to give like a job talk or something, and I have to talk about my practice or an artist talk, I would describe it as a form of inquiry
Yeah,
because I come from an academic background and it is very process oriented for me. But I mean, I do think that, yeah, I mean, I do it because it's a way of processing things, whether that
yeah,
is intellectual processing of something that I'm interrogating in a critical way or an emotional processing of grief or of rage or whatever. It's a way for me to process things. And it happens when it can happen. And that's another thing, though, too, because I think that artists also put a lot of pressure on themselves to produce work a lot. And I've heard the saying before of like, oh, if you're truly an artist, you're just compelled to stay up late and work on your art all the time. And I'm like, no, I don't buy into that either. I'm like, I gotta sleep. And it will happen when it can and when it
yeah.
needs to. And I'm fine with that.
Well, you've been generous. I just got a couple more, but I gotta interject. Another Michigander, Paul Schrader, said, "The role of the artist is to attempt to sell out but fail." Which is hilarious because it really romanticizes. It's like, "Oh, yeah, well, I tried to sell out, but I'm so true to my art, I failed." It's like, "Yeah, right, okay."
Yeah.
So what's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Oh, that inspires me. Um, I I think that, I mean, in my profession in higher ed, I think that higher ed is going to change a lot.
Say it again. What is it?
Higher ed is going to change a lot, and I think that's good, and I think it needs to. But on that kind of same note, I see what I hope is an increasing accessibility of um, of anyone to make
Yeah,
time-based media and get it out to the world. I mean, I think that the kind of argument for the sort of democratization of media creation, right? I mean, everyone will say like, "Oh, the internet, it's the great democratizer." I mean, it is and it isn't, right? But I hope that we have a movement, towards um, more inclusivity, more accessibility by the ubiquity, by the sheer ubiquity of the tools. Um, yeah.
yeah. Well, Jean Cocteau said it. He said, "When film becomes tools become as cheap as paper and pencil." That's and that's it is. It's pretty amazing. Wow, I don't want this to end, but the last question is, what gives you the most optimism?
Gives me the most optimism. Oh, I'm not a very naturally optimistic person. I'm kind of a cynic. Um, let's see, what gives me the most optimism? I mean, I am a mom though. I do have to like, when I look at my kids,
Yeah,
they, kids are pretty amazing. They're resilient, they're thoughtful, they're incredibly creative. My kids are at a good age right now too. They're 4 and 6, so like they're not jaded yet. They're still super open to the world. I guess when you see that kind on a of openness on a daily basis, there's hope there, right?
Yeah.
That there's hope for the future. um, because they haven't had it hammered out of them yet, right?
Yeah.
And
It's
hopefully
amazing.
some of it.
Yeah, it's amazing because I got the question from the one of the last questions they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life is what gives you the most optimism? And he said other people.
Mm,
Most nine almost 98% people answer what gives you the most optimism? They go youth, younger people,
yeah.
my students, whatever, you know.
Mm,
But
yeah.
I sure don't want this to end. I'm gonna hit the end button, but I wanna keep talking forever and ever. It was really enlightening. Thank you so much, Julie. What a pleasure.
Oh, it was fun. Thanks. That was a lot of fun. And take
Okay.
care. Bye bye.
Bye.